I think Ronald Reagan gave us a great example when federal employees decided they were going to strike. He said, "You strike, you're fired." Simple concept to me. To the extent that we could use that once again, absolutely.
Tim Scott says it's a simple concept for him to fire United Auto Workers that are striking because Ronald Reagan fired folks that were striking before. That makes sense. Matter of fact, what he threw in there was federal workers is what Ronald Reagan fired, which I don't think anybody thinks that was a great move either there, but at least he had the right to do it. Tim Scott there, of course, he's running for president and he's trying to find some traction here. So I guess he's going with I just hate the regular blue collar worker line. I guess it works for Donald Trump. Why not work for him? But the problem is there was a bit of silence there as he gave that line. And maybe it was the looks of some folks in the audience that really showed that they weren't buying what he was selling, like this person there. As soon as he said it, they were like, say what? What's that you say now? So he continued on and he went with the line, or at least the approach that always works when you're in conservative circles. If you struck out once, you always hit home runs when you go for Joe Biden.
The first thing, part of the challenge that we have today with President Biden is, and I don't mean this to be disingenuous, I mean this to be sincere. I'm not sure if the words are bought and paid for, but certainly he has been leased by the unions. And I say that because the first bill he passed, y'all remember the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package? Yeah. That only had 1% for COVID vaccines? It had $86 billion, I believe, for union pensions. Because they keep making these deals. And as a result of the deal, they promise too much, deliver too little, and the taxpayers pick up the tab.
So he has issues with Joe Biden's cozy relationship with unions, which also provide a lot of help for workers that would be absolutely dismantled by their employers if they weren't there. Yeah, I'm sure there's tough tactics and there's pushback and high demands. That's because these folks that are working never get all of their demands met in the first place. Of course you start high. Still though, he has these issues with it. What about this whole thing about Reagan? Just flesh out really fast. Since he brought up Reagan, because it's really easy for Republicans to say Reagan, Ronald Reagan, Ronald Reagan. If you say Ronald Reagan, that means anything else I say after that is absolutely acceptable because Ronald Reagan is a deity, even though he did horrific things. Still though, this is the Reagan line. Former President Reagan famously fired the air traffic controllers when their union, the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, called a strike in '81. The saga was a pivotal moment in US labor relations when the federal government signaled to corporate America that it was open season on unions. Private sector collective bargaining has continued to decline since then. Sounds like a great move because private sector bargaining has been going down. I guess it's a win. More though, the air traffic controllers were federal workers who didn't have the legal right to strike or even to bargain over wages with their employer, though they were demanding raises. Reagan acted within his powers when he fired them. The thousands of controllers who participated in the strike were never allowed to return to their jobs. Good job, man, those Americans, America first, right? F those workers. A little bit more. But the UAW strike, which has hit Ford, General Motors, and Jeep parent company Stellantis, involves private sector workers bargaining with private sector employers. It's illegal, Tim Scott. It's illegal under the National Labor Relations Act to fire workers for taking part in a lawful strike. So far, none of the big three automakers have claimed that the auto worker strikes are unlawful because they'd be lying if they did. But then again, I guess the plan is Tim Scott would be President Scott would come in. I guess he'd push for Republicans who would be controlling all of Congress to get rid of the National Labor Relations Act. Somehow flip that and make sure that unions and workers have zero rights because Reagan. Right? There's more happening, but Ray, what's your thoughts, his approach here?
Well, primarily my thought is this is a man who's never gonna be president of the United States. Not now, not this election, not next, not ever. He has no charisma. I don't even know how he got elected into the office that he holds now. Whenever I see Tim Scott, the first thing that I think of is the time that Dianne Feinstein accidentally confused him for Raphael Warnock and congratulated him on winning his election in Georgia. She did. I'm also now, every time I see him, I'm now going to think about the tweet he just posted about how he got hungry and went to the Golden Arches, and he's sitting there with a tray of McDonald's in front of him and the weirdest smile I've ever seen. You're campaigning in Iowa. Go to a diner. It is like the prototypical Iowa campaign thing to do is go to a small business restaurant, sit at the counter, and pose for a picture with someone working there. This guy goes to McDonald's. I mean, like if someone who is a politician completely lacks any political instincts, that person is Tim Scott.
Well, I mean, he says things softly and kindly. He walks up and no one ever dislikes him. He's not an abrasive guy. He's not going to go call, maybe he's called a couple names here. And I feel like I was surprised when I've seen that, but that's his approach. And then he looks very handled by staffers and campaign directors that are telling him which way to go about it. Which somebody told him, you go to a restaurant somewhere, and he's like, "There's a McDonald's. I haven't had a Big Mac in a while." It has to be a certain kind, Tim. But let's go to what it is that these UAW strikers are actually asking for, because apparently it's way over the top. They want to destroy the auto industry in America. So this is what they're looking for. There's four parts of the demand. I want to focus on mainly the wage increases. Let's go to that, because they want wage increases of about 40%. Damn. Wages are, for obvious reasons, the biggest sticking point in the ongoing talks. The UAW is pushing for a roughly 40% general wage increase for its members over the length of a 4-year contract. And so far, the companies have offered to pay raises of about 20%, which is a jump from their opening bids, but still only half of what the union sees as adequate. Really fast though, because I read more details as this whole thing went through. NPR was putting all this together. When it comes to that raise on that, they'd had previous negotiations of 2007, 2008, where part of what they conceded, the workers' side, was nearly about 20% of a jump in raises they wouldn't have gotten to help out these auto workers, from my reading of this as well. So they're just looking to get that part back that would have been a part of a normal wage increase, especially as all of these, the income comes in and the amount of money, the profits that are making from these auto companies also still increases. And who's getting paid? You guys know who's getting paid? Not these folks. There's a little bit more though, you guys. But for auto workers, it's also personal. The contract UAW negotiated in 2007 included a freeze in base wages for workers over the length of that 4-year agreement. This is what I was just mentioning. And as a result, the average hourly wage for workers manufacturing motor vehicles and parts has dropped by more than 20% over the past 2 decades when adjusted for inflation. That's according to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So it's not even necessarily something they're looking to gouge them on, even though 40% sounds crazy. But they're looking for that 20% when there should be another 20% that would have been there if they didn't have those concessions. Last part here, General Motors CEO Mary Barra, the highest paid chief executive among the big three, made nearly $29 million last year. The SEC filings show that this is 362 times the median GM employee's paycheck. So when you hear folks talk about how this is destroying the auto industry, and I can't believe these greedy workers want living wages, or even if it's above living wages, how about we start normalizing that? I don't have to live at the base living wage, because someone making $29 million last year is definitely the F not living at a base minimum, barely making it by wage. That's above and beyond. Why can't I be at least beyond, not necessarily above? You don't deserve it, you're just an American. Rayyvana, the other parts that they're demanding about is reinstating the cost of living protections as things have changed, ending the 2-tier system for wages and benefits, and also job security as many of these companies transition over into EV, these electric vehicle changes, which are gonna cost them tons of money. That's for sure, but they're making tons of money. What's your thoughts?
Well, primarily, like the first thing I'm thinking of is, the year mentioned when these previous negotiations happened, when they reached this previous agreement, 2007 is important, because these shifts in agreement were made at a time where there was, a very low union support in this country, and at a time where the Great Recession was happening. And it made somewhat sense to go, to have these shifts in the way that the structuring of the employment is, to protect the jobs at the time, because the profits were not at an all-time high. They are now. They haven't gone back to the previous system, and we're watching the CEO make more money than they ever have before. And it's time for the workers to see the fruits of their labor. I'm also so excited to see this shift in momentum towards unionization, the shift in support of unions that has been, as I said, historically low in the past is now, at least in modern history, historically high. So, and all the solidarity between the unions striking right now is fantastic. So to see someone like Tim Scott at this moment decide to say that we should fire the striking workers is such a misread of what's happening.
It's outrageous, but you know what? He thinks that that's the way to go because that's the way it's always been. Conservatives, Republicans specifically now are always like, anything that changes, anything that we shift as far as how we do things in this country is a bad thing. The way it was always done was great. That's why we don't want to teach the history of the bad things that we've done, because then that'll start to dispel the other things we've done that maybe weren't as horrific as how we enslaved folks just to get the economy of this entire country going to where it went. Even past that, the way that we've treated workers in the past, there's all kinds of things. Because there's a reason why we talked about Sarah Huckabee Sanders in Arkansas lifting some child labor laws. They're all over the place as far as changing the way things are, because they never wanted to change from then either. The things that exploit workers, that exploit the regular blue collar folks. So when you hear Republicans talk about how they're working for the regular guy. All those folks at MAGA rallies and that Trump is going up to Michigan to talk to folks, they're not ready to hear it anymore because that's hitting them in their pocketbooks. They're seeing who their enemies are. And many times it's Republican elected officials that are working for the people who are looking to exploit them. It's a simple equation. It's a matter of whether or not people want to look past all the culture war BS and see how they're coming for your money. And they'll blame other folks instead. Tim Scott did it immediately after not getting an applause line for saying F those workers. Oh, let me shift to Joe Biden. It always wins because then their brain's spinning. Oh, that's right, I hate Joe Biden. Therefore, I'm okay that I'm broke and they're exploiting me. That's what they think of you, Republican voters.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.